The sky of Virelia was no longer blue. It had turned into a heavy gray that hung low over the ruins of what used to be one of the most beautiful cities in the galaxy. Wind moved through the shattered buildings, carrying with it the ashes of memories and whispers of voices that no longer existed. Among the remains walked Lyra, her once bright silver skin now dull from dust, her pale hair tangled and lifeless. Each step she took echoed softly in the silence. Her world had ended. She had been the daughter of one of the council members who had refused to choose a side when the war between the noble houses began. Her father believed peace could still be restored. But when both sides turned on one another, they destroyed everything in their path: cities, families, even the sky itself. Now only scattered survivors remained, most of them fleeing to other systems to start again. But Lyra could not leave. Her heart refused to abandon the land where her family had fallen. She moved slowly through the broken streets, clutching a small silver locket against her chest. Inside, it was a picture of her family, burned on the edges but still clear enough for her to see their faces. She would open it whenever she felt herself fading, as if looking at them could somehow keep her alive a little longer. Her stomach ached from hunger. She had not eaten properly in days. Her water was nearly gone. Still, she kept walking, hoping for something. Maybe a signal, a sound, or a sign that someone else was alive. But there was nothing. Only the soft rumble of the distant wind and the slow fall of dust from the broken towers. Above the gray clouds, a small ship entered orbit. It was not a warship, not anymore. The human vessel Atlas Dawn was a rescue and relief ship, traveling through destroyed colonies to find survivors. Inside the cockpit sat Ethan Cole, a human engineer and rescue officer. His dark hair was messy, his uniform slightly torn, and his face carried the kind of tiredness that came from years of seeing too many broken worlds. He was not a soldier anymore. He had left that behind after the Terran-Vaxxon conflict. His sister had been killed during that war, and since then he had joined relief missions to save instead of fight. When he received the coordinates for Virelia, he almost refused. The report said the planet was lifeless, but something inside him whispered to go anyway. Scan for life signs, he told the ship's AI. A moment passed and a faint signal appeared on the display. One life form, weak near the Capitol ruins. Ethan frowned. Let's go get them. He guided the ship through the thick atmosphere, landing on the cracked surface near what used to be the Council Plaza. As the landing gear settled into the dust, he grabbed his scanner, medkit, and a thermal cloak. The air outside was cold, filled with fine ash that stung his throat. He followed the signal through broken archways and burned gardens until he saw movement near the remains of a stone monument. There, lying against the wall, was a figure, thin, trembling, and covered in gray dust. "Hey," he called softly, stepping closer. "It's okay. I'm here to help." Lyra looked up weakly. Her eyes were a dull violet, unfocused. When she saw the human suit, she flinched and tried to move away. "Stay back," she whispered hoarsely. You're human." Ethan stopped a few feet away, keeping his voice calm. "Yeah, I'm human, but I'm not here to hurt you. I'm part of a rescue team." "There's no one left to rescue," she muttered, looking down. "Then maybe I'm here for you," he said quietly. Lyra tried to stand but nearly fell. Ethan rushed forward and caught her just before she hit the ground. Her skin was cold to the touch. He could feel her shaking under the thin fabric of her clothes. Without hesitation, he wrapped his thermal jacket around her shoulders. "Easy," he said, lowering her gently to the ground. "You're dehydrated and freezing. I have water and food on my ship. We need to get you there." She didn't answer. Her gaze drifted to his hands as he opened a bottle of water and offered it. Slowly, she took it, her fingers brushing against his glove. She drank in small sips, her eyes never leaving his face. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why what? Why would you help me? Your people didn't come when the war started. You didn't stop it." Ethan looked down at the ground, his jaw tight. "You're right. We didn't, but I can't change that. What I can do is help now." For a long moment, she said nothing. The wind howled softly between the ruins. Finally, she whispered, "I don't want to die here." "Then don't," he said simply. "Come with me." He helped her stand, wrapping his arm around her waist to steady her. She leaned against him, her body weak but still carrying the grace of her people. Together, they walked slowly through the rubble back toward the ship. At one point, the ground shifted under their feet. A structure nearby began to collapse. Without thinking, Ethan pushed Lyra out of the way and covered her with his body as a wall of dust and debris fell around them. The crash echoed across the empty city. When the dust settled, Lyra opened her eyes to find Ethan shielding her, his arms holding her close. "You're crazy," she said weakly. "Maybe," he replied, coughing. "But at least you're okay." She stared at him for a long moment. No one had ever done something like that for her, not even when her world was still alive. When they finally reached the ship, Lyra hesitated before stepping inside. The human technology was strange to her, clean, simple, but warm in its design. Ethan guided her to the medical bench and started scanning her vitals. "You've got mild radiation exposure and dehydration," he said, "but you'll recover." He handed her a food pack and she took it slowly, watching him work. There was something in the way he moved, careful, focused, kind. He didn't speak much, but every time he looked at her it was with quiet concern. After a while she said, "You lost someone too, didn't you?" Ethan looked up, surprised. "Yeah," he said softly. "My sister. How did you know?" "You have the eyes of someone who's seen loss," she replied quietly. "Same as mine." He smiled faintly. "Then I guess we understand each other." They ate in silence for a while. Outside, the wind roared against the hull of the ship. Inside, there was only the soft hum of power systems and the warmth of the cabin lights. Lyra looked around, noticing a small charm hanging near the control panel, a blue crystal shaped like a tear. "That's not human," she said. "It was my sister's," Ethan explained. "She got it from a trader from your system years ago." She said it reminded her that even far worlds could share beauty. Lyra looked down at her locket, then back at him. Maybe she was right. Hours passed. Lyra rested while Ethan made repairs to the ship's systems. Every so often he glanced toward her to make sure she was comfortable. When she woke from a short sleep, she saw him sitting by the window, staring out at the lifeless horizon. "You could leave me," she said quietly. "You could drop me at a station and go." He turned to her. "I could, but I won't." "Why?" "Because no one should be left alone," he said simply. For a moment, Lyra felt her chest tighten. Those words were simple, but they cut through the emptiness she had been carrying. As the night deepened, the stars began to appear again through the thin clouds. From the ship's window, the view was breathtaking. Thousands of lights scattered across the endless dark. Lyra stood beside Ethan, both of them silent. "My people used to believe that every star was a memory," she said softly. "When someone died, their light joined the sky." Ethan nodded. "Then your world must have a lot of stars watching tonight." Lyra smiled faintly for the first time in days. "Maybe yours too." They stood there for a long while, the silence no longer heavy with sorrow but filled with something gentler, understanding. Later, when Ethan went to check the ship's power levels, Lyra walked quietly to where he had placed his jacket earlier. She picked it up, feeling the warmth still inside the fabric. For the first time since the war began, she didn't feel cold. When he returned, she said softly, "Thank you." "For what?" "For not walking away." He smiled tiredly. "That's what humans do best. We keep walking even when everything else falls apart." That night, while Ethan slept in the pilot's chair, Lyra sat near the viewport watching the stars. She thought about her father's words before he died. When everything is gone, kindness will be the last light. She turned her eyes toward the man who had risked his life to save her, and for the first time she began to believe those words were true. As dawn broke over the dead world of Virilia, the light touched the ship like a promise of something new. Lyra touched her locket gently, then whispered, "Maybe it isn't over yet." And somewhere in the quiet hum of the ship, Ethan stirred and smiled in his sleep, because even in ruin, hope had found a way to survive. The Atlas dawn drifted silently through the orbit of Virilia. The ruined planet below stretched like a scar across the galaxy, but inside the ship, warmth and light filled the cabin. Lyra had begun to recover, her strength slowly returning as she ate, drank, and rested under Ethan's careful watch. She still carried the weight of loss in her eyes, but it no longer pinned her to the ground. Days passed. The two moved in a quiet routine. Ethan worked on repairing the ship's systems, checking the life support and scanning for signals from other survivors. Lyra, once so fragile, began to help him, learning to operate the ship's communication devices and assist with navigation. Every small task gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since her city fell. During one routine scan, a signal appeared on the monitor, a small Varelian transport, barely functioning, drifting through space. Lyra's heart skipped. Could it be her people, Hope surged inside her chest, mixing with fear. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling, "that signal. It might be them. It could be my people." He studied the readings. "It's weak. Could be a trap. Could be survivors. Either way, we should check it out." Lyra nodded, swallowing hard. She had prepared herself for disappointment, but she also dared to hope. The Atlas Dawn adjusted its course and moved toward the source of the signal. As they approached, the ship's sensors picked up several small vessels surrounding the transport. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Pirates. This is a trap. Pirates?" Lyra whispered, fear creeping into her voice. "Yes. Some scavengers use fake distress signals to lure survivors and steal from them. We need to be careful." Ethan quickly prepared the ship's defensive systems. Lyra stayed close, observing the controls he had taught her to use. Together, they moved through the debris field, scanning for a safe path. When they finally arrived near the transport, a small skirmish broke out. One of the pirate ships fired a warning shot, and sparks flew across the outer hull of the Atlas Dawn. Ethan took a deep breath. "Stay behind me," Lyra nodded. Her hands gripped the console, but her heart beat with courage she didn't know she still had. Ethan's plan was quick and precise. He guided the ship behind a floating satellite, using it as cover, then overloaded the power conduit to create a blinding flash. The pirates were momentarily stunned, allowing the Atlas Dawn to rush in and grab the transport before anyone could react. It was dangerous, but Ethan's calculations were perfect. The ship shook as they escaped, and Lyra clutched his arm, fear and relief mingling. "You didn't have to risk yourself for me," she said, voice tight with emotion. Ethan looked at her, exhaustion and warmth in his eyes. "I wouldn't leave you. Not after everything." For the first time, Lyra allowed herself to fully acknowledge the bond growing between them. In a world of death and ruin, the human had given her safety, hope, and the courage to keep moving forward. Once the danger passed, they docked the Atlas Dawn with the transport. Inside, Lyra saw scattered survivors, her people. They were dirty, weak, and scared, but alive. Recognition filled her chest as they saw her. "Lyra!" one of them cried, rushing forward to embrace her. Tears streamed down faces that had almost given up hope. Lyra looked at Ethan, her eyes wide. "They're alive." "Yes," he said softly. "You've got your people back." She turned back to the survivors, helping them organize supplies and stabilize the transport. Despite her relief, part of her heart stayed with Ethan. She had found safety and courage with him. She realized she had never felt this level of trust with anyone else. As the survivors worked together, a quiet moment passed between Ethan and Lyra. The ship's lights reflected softly on her silver skin, highlighting the subtle warmth returning to her cheeks. "You saved me," she whispered. Ethan smiled gently. "We saved each other in a way." The next few days were filled with repairs, planning, and quiet conversation. Lyra shared stories of her city, of the peaceful times before the war, while Ethan told her about human life and their struggles to survive in different galaxies. They laughed quietly at small things, like the way the transport's food rations always seemed to disappear faster than expected, or how a stray repair bot kept following Ethan around. One evening, during a calm orbit, Lyra walked to the ship's viewport. The stars stretched endlessly, and she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known since the war began. Ethan joined her, carrying a small tray with 2 cups of warm drink. "You know," he said, "I thought I'd only see dead worlds after my sister. But being here with you shows me that life finds a way, even after everything falls apart." Lyra turned to him, her eyes shining in the dim light. "I never believed I'd see hope again, but you make me believe it's possible." They shared a quiet moment, standing side by side. Lyra reached out, her hand brushing against his. Ethan looked at her, then gently took her hand in his, holding it with care. For the first time in years, she felt safe, not just physically but emotionally. Someone cared, not out of duty but because they chose to. Days later, the survivor transport was ready to depart for a safer system. Lyra stood at the airlock, preparing to leave the ruins of her planet behind. Her people gathered around her, thanking her for leading them, for not giving up, for being their hope. "Lyra," one elder said, "you have our gratitude. You are our light." She smiled faintly, but her heart ached in one part of her chest. She had her people, but she also had the human who had saved her in the ruins. She turned to Ethan, who had quietly maintained the Atlas Dawn, making sure the transport was safe. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. Ethan stepped closer. You've earned it, he replied. You've survived when everything tried to take you down. And you've helped them survive too. Lyra's hand hovered over his chest. She could feel the steady beat of his heart. She whispered, My world is back, but I can't forget what you gave me. You gave me more than life. You gave me hope. Ethan smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Then stay with me. Not because you have to, but because you want to. Let's start a new world together. Yours, mine, ours. Tears came to Lyra's eyes. She had wandered through ashes and darkness, believing herself alone. But here, in the warmth of a human's arms, she realized she was no longer alone. She had a choice, a chance, and a bond stronger than the fear that had haunted her. Without hesitation, she stepped closer. Ethan wrapped his arms around her gently, holding her as if to tell her she belonged. And for the first time since the war, she let herself fully lean into another being, not just for safety, but for comfort, for trust, for hope. The survivors watched them silently, understanding that this bond was something rare and precious, forged in the fires of loss and despair. It was a reminder that even in a galaxy scarred by war, light could return in unexpected ways. That night, Lyra sat beside Ethan as the ship moved toward the safe system. The stars outside reflected in her eyes, and she whispered softly, When everything ended, you gave me a beginning. Ethan held her close, not saying a word, letting the quiet speak for itself. And in the soft hum of the Atlas dawn, among stars and distant planets, two souls who had faced death, loss, and despair finally found a kind of peace that could only exist in hope, trust, and the warmth of another's arms. The journey ahead was uncertain. There would still be challenges, dangers, and decisions to make. But for Lyra, the past no longer controlled her. She had survived, she had hope, and she had a human who chose her when everything else had abandoned her. Together, they looked forward toward distant worlds, toward life and laughter, and toward a future rebuilt from the ashes, not just of Virelia, but of fear, loneliness, and despair. And in the quiet, warm embrace of the man who had wrapped her in his arms, Lyra knew one truth above all: she was never truly alone again.